Hello, fifth graders. Mrs. Bandy here, welcoming you back to another exciting week of math. I am coming to you live from my math lab, aka the spare bedroom in the Bandy bungalow. I hope you're doing well. You are turning in all of your assignments. You're remembering to drink water, get plenty of rest, be kind to others, and most importantly, wash your hands. Let's get started with a little bit of math today. This week, we're going to be concentrating on line plots again. But unlike last week, this week, we are going to be creating the line plots. If you remember, last week, we were just taking a look at already created line plots and we were interpreting our data. So, line plots are typically used to organize and represent data. Like I told you last week, a lot of times in the real world, you might see a line plot created if you're an accountant or you're in some science field where you need to represent data that you have. Let's take a look at the next slide and get started with creating some line plots. On the screen, you're going to see that I have some data for us to create a line plot for. Let's take a look at what we have. It says the dogs in Paulina's pet shop have the following weights. The weights are in pounds. How can you organize this information in a line plot? So the problem is talking about this data right here. And before we can jump into creating the line plot, part of the process is for us to organize our data. We can't just jump in and create the line plot first. We need to make sure that we have the data organized so that we don't miss any of the data when we're creating a line plot. We don't leave any of the data out. So the first step that we're going to do is we're going to make a frequency table. You can see over here on this side of my screen, I have created a table. You would do the same thing when you're at home. You would have to create this table or this frequency table on your own. I started to create it already for you so that the page is organized and nice and neat and not crowded. So you can see that we know that the data represents the weights of dogs in pounds because the title tells us that. So I went ahead and I moved that over to my first column. I am going to then take a look at what is the least weight of the dogs in pounds. So what is the least pounds? So as I go through my data, you can see I'm going through and I'm looking for the smallest number, because when you create a number line, your number line should start with the smallest amount that shows up in your data. So I'm looking for the smallest. So 8.5, 12 1/4, and I'm expecting you to be doing the same thing as we move forward when you're creating your frequency table and then your line plot. So, okay, 8.5 is the smallest we have so far. Okay, 12 1/4, that's not smaller. 6, okay, 6 is smaller than 8.5, so far that's the smallest. 11.5 is not smaller, 7 1/4 is not smaller, 12 1/4 is not smaller, 8.5 is not smaller, 12 1/4 is not smaller, 8 1/2 is not smaller, 12 1/4 is not smaller, 12 1/4 is not smaller, 6, that's the same size. So I know that my smallest amount right now is 6 pounds, so I'm going to write that first in my frequency table. Then I'm going to continue on going from least to greatest. So least to greatest. So 6, were there any 7s? And you should be doing the same process either in your head or out loud. So let's go through. Were there any 7s, or was there anything after 6, 6 1/2, 6 1/4, any of those? I didn't see any. So any 7s. So I'm going through, not a 7, not a 7. I already did this one, and I did the 6. Okay, so there's 2 of them. I'll get to that in a second. All right, 6, 7. Okay, here's a 7. Let me see if there's any more 7s. Anything less than 7 1/4? No, 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 no. Okay, so then the next largest would be 7 1/4. Let me erase that and make that a little neater for you. 7 1/4. It's hard to write on the computer like that. Okay, so I have 7 1/4. All right, so now I can, so then I'm going to go on to the next one. Anything come after, and I could go back and I could say to the 6, okay, how many 6s showed up? Well, how many 6s were in my data? Do you guys remember? I had 1 here and 1 here. So I'm going to make 2 tally marks. So that means it occurs twice in the data. So then let's do the 7 1/4. And for me, I like to cross them out so that I know that I've already come across them. So 7 1/4. How many times did 7 1/4 occur in our data? Let's see. I have 1 here, so that's 1. So I should only have 1. So 1 tally, which means it occurred once. All right, let's go on and let's see what comes after 7 1/4. I have an 8 1/2 here. Let's see if anything else. I'm just scanning my data. Anything else? There's another 8 1/2, another 8 1/2. I don't see anything else that comes after 7 1/4. So the next fraction that would go in our frequency table would be 8 1/2. Now you tell me how many times did that occur and how many tally marks should I have? Right, I should have 3 tally marks. 1, 2, 3, because it was represented 3 times. That frequency would be 3. And then I would just mark them off so that I'm not double counting and I'm keeping track of my data and being nice and organized. All right, so let's see what comes after 8 1/2. Do I have any 9s? No. 10s? No. 11? Yeah, I have an 11 here. So I have an 11 there. Anything else? So then what would go here? Right, 11 1/2. And how many times did 11 1/2 show up in our data? 1. So it only showed up 1 time. Okay, so 1 tally mark and the number 1, right? All right, so then what's left? What do I have left? It looks like I have all the same number left. 12 1/2, right? How many times does that occur? 12 1/4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I would write 12 1/4. And I would have how many tally marks? 3, 4, 5, right? For a number of 5. All right, so there is our data taken from the data chart and put it into a frequency table. This way, I'm ready to go. I haven't missed any of the data points, so I'm not going to mess up my line plot when I get ready to create it. I have all of the data here and ready for me. Go ahead and go on to the next page because I'm going to show you and we're going to work together to take this frequency table and put it into a line plot. Now that we have our frequency table created, we need to go ahead and create our line plot. So you can see on the screen that I went ahead and created the number line for our line plot. You can see that here. I should probably pick a different color besides white. You can see that here. You were asked before you watch this video to watch the video on creating the number line. In case you don't have a ruler at home, I left a video up for you to show you what you could do in order to create a number line using simple tools that you have at home. So if you're getting to this point and you didn't watch that video, I want you to pause the video so that you can go back and take a look at how you create a number line using simple tools at home. All right, so I went ahead and created my number line, but I want you to pay close attention to how the intervals that I have on my number line. You can see that I have starting with 5 and going up to 13. You can also see that I have broken my number line into 4 equal parts between each whole number. Now, why would I have done that? What would be the reasoning behind that? Yeah, so the reasoning behind that is because if you take a look at our data, what fractions do we have in our data? We have 1/4 and we have 1/2, which means our data goes up by 1/4. So that means that my number line has to take an account for that. It's not counting by whole numbers in our data, we're counting by fourths. So I need to make sure that I take an account for that when I'm creating my number line. Also, you can see, because we have our data in the frequency table, that the largest number we have is 12 and 1/4. So that means that our number line has to go to the next whole number. So the next whole number after 12 and 1/4 would be 13. So that's why my number line looks the way it does. All right, you're also going to notice that my line plot has 2 things which we learned about last week when we were analyzing line plots. It has a title, which is weights of dogs, and the number line is also labeled in pounds. This is important because when you go to create your number line, you need to make sure that you have a title and your number line, or when you go to make your line plot, that you have a title and your number line is labeled. If you don't have a title, we have no idea what your line plot could be about. It could be about pizzas, shoes, days off of school. It could be anything. So we have to make sure that we pay close attention to the fact that the title is there and the number line is labeled. All right. So now that we've covered those things, we're ready to plot our data on the line plot. I'm going to start with the least number of pounds, right, for the dog weight, and that's 6. So you know from last week when we were analyzing line plots that I put a dot over top of that 6 to represent the number of dogs that weigh 6 pounds. How many dots am I going to put over top of the 6? Right, 2, because you're looking at our frequency chart. So I'm going to put, let's see, 1, 2. Okay, let's make that look a little nicer. Might be easier to do X's, because remember last week we said we could do X's or we could do circles or dots, right? Okay, so now I have this complete, so I'm gonna check it off. So now I'm gonna move over to 7 1/4. Okay, so here's my 7, and like I said earlier, my number line is broken into 4 equal parts between each whole number. So I know that the first tally marker, the first slash after the 7 is going to be 1/4. The second one is going to be what? Right, 2/4, or in simplest form, that's 1/2. And then the third mark would be, right, 3/4, right, because we're counting up by fourths. So here's 7 1/4. My frequency table is telling me that I need 1x over 7 1/4. So there it is. Then I have this one checked off, I have this one checked off. Now I have to go to 8 1/2. So I'm going to locate that on my number line first. So here's 8, here's 9. I know 8 1/2 is between 8 and 9. And then we talked about which mark that would be. It would be this one right there. So how many x's am I going to put over 8 1/2? Right, 3. So 1, 2, 3. I'm going to make that look a little nicer. 1, 2, 3. All right. Okay, so I'm going to check that off. Now, I want you to pause the video in just a second, and I want you to think to yourself, all right, where do I go from here? Where am I going to plot the rest of my data on the line plot? Take a minute, pause the video, think about that so that when you come back, you can check in to see if what you're thinking matches my thinking. Go ahead and pause now. All right, so you had a chance to take a moment and think and look at the rest of the frequency table to see exactly where the rest of our data needs to go in our line plot. And if you said that the next piece of data that needs to be plotted goes on 11 1/2, you are correct because that's what comes next in our frequency table. Now, also, if you said, I know an 11 1/2 is between 11 and 12, and it's that mark right there, you would also be correct. And if you said we need 1x over that, you would also be correct. So we can check that off. Now, I'm hoping that you went ahead and you looked at the next piece of data and where it needs to be plotted. What would be the next piece of data? Right, that 12 1/4. Now, 12 1/4 is between what two whole numbers? Right, 12 and 13. And if I go back, because I'm a great mathematician, you're a great mathematician, you can count by fourths, you know that the next mark after the whole number is 1/4. And isn't that what we're looking for? Right. So how many x's am I going to put over 12 1/4? And where am I going to look to find that information? Right, I'm going to look at my frequency table and I'm going to look right here at the frequency. So how many x's am I putting? Right, 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes. So that means there were 5 dogs that weighed 12 1/4 pounds. Now that we've had the opportunity to create a line plot together, I'm going to send you off on your own to do some work. You see on the screen, I have the playlist for this week. It's week 10, May 19th to May 25th. This is what you're going to see when you go into Envision today. You're going to see, again, you go to start.hcps.org. Then you see the Pearson tile, you click on that, then you click on classes, and then you'll see this playlist created for you. Inside the playlist, the first assignment is the practice. You are not to do all of the problems in the practice. You are only doing problems number 4 and 5. Once you've done problems 4 and 5, you move on to the second assignment in the playlist, which is the practice buddy. As usual, and as always, when you're done with the practice buddy, in the review screen, you're going to hit submit. That way, it'll come to myself and also your homeroom teacher for us to review. I've also created under the enrichment section of the Padlet, there is a riddle for you. This is optional. And then also, I have created in the optional section a video for reteaching. So if you need even more instruction on how to create the line plot, it's there. There's a link to our YouTube page there, and you can watch that. As always, if you need anything, please reach out to myself or your homeroom teacher. Good luck and happy mathing.